I've known GaryMarcus for a long time. He's an amazing scientist who has had an illustrious career since the very beginning when he created his own focus of study at Hampshire College in cognitive science. So I don't know what you were doing when you were, 17, 18, around thereabouts, but I wasn't creating my own new area of study in college, and he went on and did that. And followed with a really illustrious career as a graduate student at MIT, working with Steven Pinker, and since then has gone on to be a professor at NYU, and that's just his academic side. In addition to that, he's also had an illustrious writing career, written some really amazing books, bestsellers, Guitar Zero, and he's also been writing for the New Yorker as well as the New York Times, has written a number of different professional articles, approximately 50 of those, in addition to a number of different book chapters and books such as Cluj. And after that, he didn't stop there. He's gone on to form a company in AI, which was recently acquired, I guess, by Uber, where he is now still carrying on an affiliation, but moving on to even bigger and better things. So with that, please welcome Dr. GaryMarcus.
Conflicting, can you all hear me okay? Instructions about whether I should take 20 minutes or 3 hours depending on when the food arrives. So just be patient. We'll get there depending on when the food comes. So I want to talk today about 3 misconceptions and a truth. You can try to guess which are which. One popular idea out there is that AI can do anything a person can do in a second. Another idea is that there's one single kind of computation in the brain. Another is that the best way to figure out AI is to simulate the brain. And another is that brains are amazing and reverse engineering them can be incredibly helpful for AI. So let's take these on in sequence. AI can do anything a person can do in a second. Maybe if I said that after the rest of it, you would say this is a straw man, nobody believes it. But here's Andrew Ng, who's one of the most popular people in the field of AI. Some of you probably took his course on Coursera about AI. He was head of Baidu's AI labs for a little while. And here's what he wrote in Harvard Business Review not that long ago. He said, if a typical person can do a mental task with less than 1 second of thought, we can probably automate it using AI either now or in the near future. And he repeated this in the Wall Street Journal just a few weeks ago. So I think it's fresh and in the public eye. And I think it's pretty representative of how a lot of people think about AI today. A lot of people are worried that the Terminator will come and eat us all for breakfast or something like that. That's in part their worry stems from thinking that AI is imminent. I don't really disagree. I don't really agree. I do think that what Andrew Ng said is true for some things. There are some things that people can do in less than a second that AI can do perfectly well, or at least reasonably well. So for example, an AI system, like a person, can probably distinguish Tiger Woods from a golf ball and do it with great confidence. The technique for doing that is typically we use a bunch of big data, we get out statistical approximations. Most common way of doing that nowadays is with something called a convolutional neural network. I won't go into the details, but it's probably nowadays worth knowing something roughly about how these things work. They have a set of input features, they do a lot of linear algebra. On those input features, they come up with output features. In some sense, they're doing a sophisticated version of correlation. It allows them, among other things, with some other tricks I won't go into right now, to play a pretty mean game of Go, better than any human being could do. And we've already had computers for a long time that can beat human beings in chess. So there are some things that humans can do in a second that machines can do better. That part of the claim is undeniable, but can they really do anything that a person can do in a second? I think that's actually not the case at all. So for example, you can look at this. If you're a deep learning machine, you probably could identify the barbell. I don't think any deep learning system would have trouble with that as long as it was in a so-called training set. So the way these things work is they have a bunch of examples. They have labels for those examples. They learn when they get new things to say which example goes there. Technical term for that is their classifier. So the deep learning net could probably classify the barbell here. Maybe, depending on the training regime, the diet that it's been fed, it might or might not recognize the dog. Well, it might recognize the dog because the eyes are typical of a dog and so forth. It might not because the ears are atypical. But when you look at this, you don't just see a dog and a barbell. Am I loud enough? Yeah, it just died. You have it all necessary. Battery? Let's see. Ooh, I think we have dead batteries. but the little light makes me suspicious. Okay, so if you see the last little light makes me suspicious. We'll see. So when you look at it, you could do other things. Like you could say, well, not only do I see a dog and a barbell, but there's something unusual here. Or you might say, wow, I wonder how the dog got to be so buff that it could manage to lift that barbell, right? So you can interpret the scene, not just see the objects and not just label the objects. And you can do that in a second, contrary to Andrew Ng's claim, machine can't. Here's another example that's been very popular. Oh, great, we have the backup now. We just switch it out. Or we use this as backup. Okay, if necessary. It's on. We don't get feedback on the video.
The other mic is off.
It's not working. This is dead. All right, well now I feel more like Oprah Winfrey, and I'll go out to the crowd now, right? Tamara, what do you think of what I just? So, Tamara, tell me, what do you see in that picture? If you were, I won't really put you on the spot, but if you were Google's captioning system that was on the, I think, front page of the New York Times in 2014, you might well say a group of young people playing game of Frisbee. So this is another machine that was trained with what we call supervised learning. So the input was a lot of pictures and a lot of captions. And sometimes you can now show it a new picture and it will come up with a caption that seems reasonable. In this case, it's pretty reasonable to say a group of young people playing a game of Frisbee, and I'm going to assume that Tamara could have done the same given the same second of computational time. Or how about this one, a person riding a motorcycle on a dirt road. Amy was able to identify a motorcycle riding in the parking lot as we walked in here with no problem. However, neither Amy nor Tamara would probably come up with the answer for this one that Google's system came up with, which was not a parking lot full of stickers, but a refrigerator filled with lots of food and drink. How many people here have read Oliver Sacks' A Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat? Or at least heard of it? Good, because this is an example of a deep learning system that has mistaken a parking sign for a refrigerator. So what is characteristic, in my view, of deep learning systems right now is that they get a lot of things right a lot of the time. They make completely insane errors some of the time. People who love deep learning systems, like my NYU colleague Ellen Kuhn, will say, well, that's just like an optical illusion. But people who have read Oliver Sacks will know better and realize that it's more like a neurological condition. If you had a child who 20% of the time made errors like this machine made, you would be very concerned. Here is another example. Oh, and another microphone. Number 3. Let's see if this one's the charm. Excuse me. How about that? Is that good volume level? Yes. Here's another one. This comes from two people who were at my last company, Geometric Intelligence. What do you see here? Pattern of yellow and black stripes. You're a deep learning system, you might say school bus. This is an actual replicable finding. Or you might see this. Probably none of you is thinking digital clock, but if you're trained on a limited set known as ImageNet of 1,000 things, well, it's the closest thing in your training set. You don't know any better, so you say digital clock. So I would say to Andrew Ng, it's not really right to say that machines can recognize anything a person can do in a second. But I won't just pick on Andrew Ng today, I'll also pick a lot on Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil is fond of saying that there is exponential growth in all kinds of things, and it's true for some kinds of things. So there's been an exponential increase in the number of transistors we can cram into a small piece of silicon. And with that has meant that we can do computation much faster, we can store much more things in memory, and so forth. So Kurzweil is christened as something like LOAR, the law of exponential or accelerating returns or something like that. But it's, again, it's what a rhetorician would call the fallacy of the composition. So it's true for some things and not others. It was true that machines can do some things in a second, but not other things that a person can do in a second. It is true there have been a lot of exponentials, but that doesn't mean they're all exponential. So here's one exponential. What I would like to do for you right now is to show you the rate of progress in what I would call strong AI, or some people call artificial general intelligence. So this is not machines that are programmed just to play Go and are given billions of training sets, games, to do that training. But what if you have machines do things like open-ended natural language, where you can't kind of program everything in? in advance. Well, I said I would like to show you that, but I can't because nobody measures it because we don't know how to do it. People only measure things they know how to do. So what they measure is how well machines do on recognizing these thousands of objects in this thing called ImageNet. So I've done the next best thing, which is to make up some data. And here are the data that I made up. This is Eliza and Siri. So Eliza was 1965. Eliza was the first chatterbot, or bot, as people would call them now. It was sort of like a psychiatrist. You could talk to it, and it would give you something looking vaguely like a reasonable conversation. So people would say, my boyfriend is kind of bothering me, and it would say, well, tell me about your mother. And the way it did that is it had a template that said, every time I see the word boyfriend, or some proportion of the time I see the word boyfriend, I'll ask about someone's family, maybe about their mother. There's now a commercial entity, maybe many, on the web selling psychiatric services of roughly the same caliber, so caveat emptor. And now we have Siri. Well, Siri actually works on basically the same principles. It's whatever it is, 40-some years later, it's still basically templates. So Siri works really well if you ask something that's just like in the template. So you ask Siri, what time is Wonder Woman playing at the mall nearby? And Siri might get that right. You ask a lot of other questions. I'll give you one example later. You move off the script, so to speak, and Siri doesn't really know what to do with your question. So when deep learning first became popular in 2012, John Markoff wrote an article about it in the New York Times. And I wrote kind of an answer to his article in the New Yorker. And here's what I wrote. And I stand by it 5 years ago, even though I think most people in the field will be like, wow, look at all the things that deep learning has done. I think we should keep our hands on our wallets. And so what I said then, and I think is still true, is realistically deep learning, this technique that everybody is talking about for machine learning these days, in AI, is only a part of the larger challenge of building intelligent machines. Such techniques lack ways of representing causal relationships and are likely to face challenges in acquiring abstract ideas. They have no obvious ways of performing logical inferences, and they're still a long way from integrating abstract knowledge. I would stand by every word of what I wrote, I guess 5 years later, 4.5 years later, even though there's a lot of apparent progress. There's been progress on things like speech recognition. You have a limited number of categories you can classify that with deep learning. But when it comes to more abstract things, I would say that you do have to make that progress. And so I referred to an old parable there and said, look, deep learning is a better ladder, but just because you have a better ladder doesn't necessarily get you to the moon. Really understanding how to build AI would be equivalent of getting to the moon. So I don't know what that quote said. So what can AI do and what can it do? Here's my 2017 edition. I'm not listing everything, but in green, I listed some of the examples of things we realistically can do with AI. And then I'll show you some examples of things that maybe we can't. So board games are pretty much licked. I mean, everybody thought Go was going to take a long time, and DeepMind was able to beat that. And there aren't too many board games that are more complicated than that, except ones that involve like human understanding, like diplomacy and stuff like that. Image recognition we can now do with our limited sets of objects. So if you want to recognize license plates, you just have, say, 26 letters and 10 digits. Machines can do that better than people can now. Speech recognition, especially in quiet rooms, machines work pretty well. If you're not a white male asking a search query in a quiet room, speech recognition doesn't work as well, but at least in these kind of limited cases, it works pretty well. And we have natural language understanding in narrow domains like movie times that I talked about. But we don't have things like open-ended conversational interfaces. So people have been talking about AI since the 1950s, working on AI since the 1950s. You might have thought maybe we have a Star Trek computer by now. As long as people are saying like deep learning to solve all this kind of stuff. But here's an example of something I tried on all the major search engines and got complete failures on, which was how much did transistors cost when the Macintosh Plus was released? So this requires putting together two sets of information that are both widely available on the web. So you can do a Google query and find out how much transistors cost at different years. This is, of course, an allusion to Kurzweil's talking about transistors costing less and less over time. So you can find that data, and and you can also find when that, what year the Mac Plus was released by going to Wikipedia or something like that. So any good undergraduate should be able to figure this out by running two queries and putting information together. But none of the search engines that I tried at least last year were able to do this, even like Wolfram Alpha's knowledge engine. Tomorrow's going to refute my whole talk right now, or take a picture, I'm not sure. So open-ended conversational interfaces, still a long way away. Automated scientific discovery. I dream as a scientist of having my job replaced by a machine so I can go to the beach. It's very lovely here. But so far, we have really made no progress, I think. We've made progress on having lots of data sets that are helpful to scientists, We can automate certain things, like I can compare this gene sequence with a list of known gene sequences and say which one's most similar. But the part of scientific reasoning is about figuring out new theories, like figuring out that there's a periodic table and not just a long list of elements. We don't know how to get machines to do. Automated medical diagnosis. We're getting to the point where we can do the image part of that. So we can feed in a radiology scan and maybe get a machine to do that pretty well. We're nowhere near to the part where the radiologist reads the notes in a file and integrates that with the picture. Long way away from that. Automated scene comprehension for blind people. And Facebook is trying to do this, but it's at the level of, like, it says bottle, when you show it 3 bottles, and the 4th bottle it says deodorant or something like that. That's an actual example from a different app. But we're a long way from having a machine that could look at a whole scene and say there's a group of people in the auditorium, some are sleeping, some seem to be enjoying the talk, everybody is wishing it would be a little cooler. Right? You don't have machines that are at that level. Domestic robots. I grew up watching the Jetsons. The most salient thing in the Jetsons to me now, as a parent with 2 small children, is Rosie the Robot. I don't know if you remember Rosie the Robot, but Rosie the Robot was a general purpose robot that could do anything. Like you could assign it to wash the dishes, make dinner, watch the kids, and so forth. I would pay an arbitrarily large amount of money to have a babysitter on demand that I could trust that would take care of my kids when I needed to go do something. There is no such thing available. We're not even close. I'll say a little bit about why we're not close later, but trust me, we're not. Safe, reliable driverless cars. It's not hard to build a driverless car now. There have actually been driverless cars since the 1990s. What's hard is making them reliable and safe. So you can get them to drive down the highway and stick between the lanes. That's what Tesla's autopilot does most effectively, as long as there aren't white trucks on sunny days in front. In which case it's more mortal, I guess, technically speaking. But on good days, you can get Tesla to do that. But the problem is you wind up with things like white cars on sunny days, and the algorithms are so crude that they're not actually reliable. So here's Andrew Ng's quote again. If a typical person can do a mental task with less than 1 second of thought, we can probably automate it either now or in the near future. And here's something I think is more realistic. If a typical person can do a mental task with less than 1 second of thought, and we can gather an enormous amount of directly relevant data, which we can do in some tasks and not others, we have a fighting chance, so long as the test data aren't too terribly different from the training data. So the beautiful thing about Go is you can simulate it perfectly and the game never changes. In the real world, if you're doing experimental economics, as Kevin is doing, you don't know if the world's going to change from 1 minute to the next, and you can't use the same techniques. And if the domain changes over time, maybe, for example, you're in a country that has 30% inflation, maybe that changes everything. It's outside the scope of the models. Okay, so, and the first part, I hope that I've persuaded you that AI is not, in fact, really comparable to a human being, what a human being can do in a second. So here's another claim. The best way to figure out AI is to simulate the brain. Ray Kurzweil, who we're already giving a hard time, has made this claim. He said, we'll have human intelligence by 2029, and he put his money where his mouth is. He bet Mitch DeFore $25,000, you can look it up online. He said, humans will be able to pass the Turing test, and not just the version where you fool somebody for 2 minutes, but you have a legitimate judge that can spend some time talking to the machine, and the judge can't tell the difference between the machine and the AI system. So he made this bet, and why did he make this bet? Well, here's part of his justification. He said, if we combine the exponential trends of computation, communication, and miniaturization, it's a conservative expectation that within 20 years, 25 years, I said this in 2002, we'll be able to send tiny scanners the size of blood cells into the brain through the capillaries to observe interneuronal connection data and even neurotransmitter levels from up close. A careful analysis of the requisite trends shows that we will understand the principles of the operation of the brain and be in a position to recreate its powers in the synthetic substrates well within 30 years. So basically what he's saying is, we're going to figure out how the brain works by 2029, and then we'll just program them out in a simulation. And we will be done, we will have AI. Okay, well maybe. In my view, we can't actually rule this out. Logically, it's still possible. I don't know for sure what will happen in the next, what's now 12 years. And there are some things that I think are consistent with what Kurzweil said. So I think methodologies for gathering data about the brain really have really improved exponentially, or at least on the road to doing it. So the techniques we had when I was in graduate school as a young professor were things like fMRI, in which you take more or less pretty pictures of the brain, but in which you have voxels, that's the equivalent of a pixel, that hold about 70,000 neurons each. And you know that computation happens at the level, or we suspect computation happens at the level of individual neurons. So a line I wrote in the New Yorker was that using fMRI to study the brain, where you have 70,000 pixels at a time, and you really want to understand what 20 of them are doing in a small circuit, was like trying to understand politics by looking out of an airplane window. So you can get something, you go by Chicago and you say, this is the hub of something, this is important. You go by some other places in the Midwest that I won't name, and you say it's less important. So you can get some things out of your fMRI scan, but you really can't understand the fine detail of how the brain is working. Well, now we have techniques like optogenetics that are, first of all, not just taking pictures, but we can cause you to manipulate things. There'll be a lot of talk in this conference about the latest cutting edge of those techniques. I'm going to come to some of the sessions to find out myself, but I think it is fair to say that we're making enormous progress. Like, we've gone from not having any chance, I think, of really understanding the brain, just in terms of the very techniques that we're using, to having at least imagining that we might have the right data. But I would say that having the right data is not enough. I would say we still know almost nothing about how to interpret brain data. We don't even know some basic questions, like how does the brain implement short-term memory? So I say a sentence. How does the brain implement short-term memory? And somehow that's coded in your brain immediately so that you can act on it. You can think about whether that's a reasonable question, is it an unfair question, is it an interesting question you'd like to do your doctoral dissertation on. You can ponder this thought after having heard it once. Well, what allows your brain to store that sentence in your memory so that you can reflect on it? Where is it stored? How is it encoded? How is it retrieved? Nobody knows the answer to any of those questions. If we don't know the answer to any of those questions, we're not in a position to build a simulation of the complete brain. So the general point there, and I'm going to belabor this point in a second because I think it's so important, is that the current analytic techniques we have for understanding brain data are actually poor. So we're reaching the point where we're going to have petabytes of data, or I don't even know the word. Amy can tell me how many zeros I need to describe the data the Allen Brain Institute has already collected and what it will collect in the next 2 years. It's vast. It's, how many hard drives we need, like a Seattle full of hard drives, in order to count all of it. But what do we do with it? Well, we don't really know. So my favorite paper last year, or this year, I guess it came out early this year, this year was called "Could a Neuroscientist Understand a Microprocessor?" If you haven't read this and you care about neuroscience, please read it. It's by Eric Jonas and Conrad Recording, and it's free because it's in PLOS Computational Biology. I'll give you part of the abstract artificial intelligence. And sorry to pick on Kurzweil again, but he's the most recent person who said this in the popular light. He said it a week or two ago. He was talking about there is one master algorithm. You can watch this video on Singularity Institute or whatever it's called. There's one master algorithm. It does hierarchical pattern recognition. Want to take the other water out? There's one master algorithm, and the idea is hierarchical pattern recognition, which is basically deep learning. Kurzweil's not really up on deep learning, but the general idea has been around for a long time. Why would anybody take this idea seriously? Let me address that before telling you why I don't believe it's right. One is the cortex is surprisingly uniform between areas and across species, at least at the level of what you see under a microscope. So it turns out you can look at prefrontal cortex, and to a first approximation, it looks a lot like occipital cortex. So prefrontal cortex is doing decision making, occipital cortex, to a first approximation, is doing vision. It looks surprisingly similar. You could have imagined that since they're doing different computations, they'd look totally different when you put them under a microscope. We also know from computational work that you can take one algorithm and get it to do different things in different circumstances by changing small numbers of parameters. I'm going to technical stuff tonight, but my colleague at NYU, Xiaojun Wang, has kind of made a career of showing this to be the case. Then there's a famous set of completely misinterpreted experiments by Sir. Maybe raise your hand if you've heard these experiments. He reconnected, or so it said, auditory cortex into visual input into auditory cortex. Has anybody ever heard these experiments? They used to get written up all the time. And the point of them, so people thought, was that it showed that cortex was interchangeable. So we at MIT, I was a grad student at MIT when he was there, we did annual skits, and somebody lampooned his experiments, and this is so you can help remember what it is. You connect the ear bone to the eye bone. That's sort of what he did metaphorically. And the experiments And the auditory cortex would respond to visual input almost as if the animal could see, even though it was missing many of the ordinary visual connections. So people got very carried away with these experiments. They basically assumed from this that the brain was, quote, equipotential, that any piece of the brain could do anything else. But what's the problem with this experiment? The problem with this experiment is that the auditory parts of the brain, the visual parts of the brain, are doing relatively similar things when you look at the larger context of all the things the brain has to do. So they're doing things like frequency analysis and spectral analysis. The experiment that Sir did not report was the one where you would take, say, prefrontal cortex and replace it with visual cortex or something like that, anything like that. So I write Raganka about 4 or 5 years ago, and I say, hey, Raganka, did you ever do these experiments? And he said, well, we tried, not that hard, didn't find anything, or something like that. So I interpreted that and said, as a joke in a talk once, I think what he means is we had 6 postdocs work on it for 5 years and couldn't get it to work at all. Which is not proof, but it's not too promising. So I'm giving this talk at Berkeley, and someone raises their hand, and she says, I was one of those postdocs. Another reason you might believe that there's just one kind of circuit is because deep learning works. So people build deep learning in a lot of different domains, and it seems to work. Of course, I've already given you arguments that there are serious limitations on what it can do. Another reason why you might wish that there was just one kind of thing in the brain is parsimony. Like, why believe someone like me, who's going to argue in a moment, that there are lots of different parts of the brain that do lots of different things, when it would be just so much easier to have one single thing? So this is parsimony. There's no question that the single canonical microcircuit idea would have the advantage of parsimony if it could actually explain all of the data. And when people have this idea, they always point to an idea that goes back to Hubel and Wiesel, for which Hubel and Wiesel rightly won a Nobel Prize, which is the idea of a hierarchical feature detector. I think I already alluded to it once. The idea is you've got a simple set of cells that respond to simple things like differences in light, and then they feed into more and more abstract cells. So Kurzweil, if you listen to his interview, will repeat this idea exactly, and it's the same idea behind deep learning. So you get to more abstract things as you go higher up the food chain. This was true in data from Hubel and Wiesel. It's true in some stuff that Christoph Koch of the Allen Brain Institute has worked on, where you have cells really at the top of the food chain, or at least pretty high, which do things like they will respond selectively only if they see or hear the words Oprah Winfrey and not to anything else. Or they will respond to Jennifer Aniston and nothing else. So you have these very abstract cells of a certain sort that are consistent with the idea of hierarchical feature detectors in the brain. And they're the impetus behind an old model called neocognitron, which is in some ways a spiritual predecessor of deep learning. Didn't learn anything, but it was pre-wired in a lot of the same ways. It's the inspiration behind Jeff Hawkins' work, if anybody knows his book on intelligence, and it's an inspiration behind deep learning. But there are, despite all of those reasons for taking this idea seriously, a lot of reasons to doubt. I'll give you at least a couple. The first is if there really is a canonical microcircuit in the brain, it's a little bit suspicious, maybe not devastating, that no one has found it even after something like 40 or 50 years of looking. So I have a kind of gentle quote from somebody in the field acknowledging they haven't found it, and then I paraphrase it with words from Bono. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Maybe it's out there, but nobody has yet identified it. The second problem is that the canonical circuit view wildly underestimates neural complexity. And for the next section, I mostly thank the Allen Brain Institute because I think they've done much of the best work in showing why we probably should take the idea of neural complexity seriously. This is not all from them, but I'll give you a few examples. So one is the complexity of the connections in the brain used to always be represented, I don't think I have a laser brain, but always used to be represented at the left half of this figure. You couldn't go to a talk on vision in neuroscience without seeing this figure, which was by David Van Essen, who's on the advisory board for the Allen Brain Institute, and one of the students. And what they did was they mapped out interconnections in the macaque brain cortex. And the first thing you say is, wow, is that complicated? You might think it's random, but if you look at it carefully for a while, you realize it's incredibly intricately structured. But the laugh is on Van Essen, so to speak, and if you found out, he and some other people actually found it's way more complicated than that diagram. So with more modern techniques, it turns out that every brain area is actually interconnected to every other, but they differ in 5 orders of magnitude in terms of how richly interconnected they are. So there's some enormous complexity in that structure. There's also enormous complexity in this 6-layered cortex, which I showed you a picture of before. So one of the reasons people talk about canonical circuits is because they say, well, we keep having this 6-layered cortex. Turns out the 6-layered cortex is not as identical as people say, but even if you just take it at face value, it's incredibly complicated, much more complicated than the kinds of things that people are using in neural networks these days, deep learning. Then there's complexity at the level of neuronal subtypes. So there are probably hundreds or thousands of different kinds of neurons in the brain. Then there is complexity at the level of the individual synapse. So Stephen Smith, who recently moved to the Allen Brain Institute, wrote a review, it's probably obsolete by now, but showing there were hundreds of different kinds of proteins in individual synapses, and they vary from one place to the next. And then there's a cool paper that the Allen Institute put together not very long ago, measuring gene expression within a single cell in a mouse. Now they've been able, recently and not yet published, to look across a wider part of cortex. And I was talking to Christoph Koch recently, and then I kind of confirmed today by text message with him. He says, preliminary data seem to show that cortical regions appear to have very similar inhibitory cell types, which would be kind of consistent with the idea of a single canonical circuit type. But as you look in different places, you find in different regions, different excitatory cell types. So that's another pointer to the brain being a much richer thing than just one single canonical type. And I always love this quote from Ramon Cajal. He's one of the patron saints, so to speak, of neuroscience. But people don't usually remember this quote from him, so I like to remind people. He says, unfortunately, nature seems unaware of our intellectual need for convenience and unity, and very often takes delight in complication and diversity. I think if you look at the brain at any level, this is obviously true. Of course, part of what Neurofutures is about, again, is trying to dig deeper into that, trying to get a handle on what that diversity is. But I think when you go and compare to a neural network that has two types of neurons, the excitatory neuron and inhibitory neuron, and it is homogeneous throughout its extent, this just doesn't look at all like the way the brain actually works. The hierarchies of feature detectors, sure, they drive most of modern machine learning, but they only drive it so far, and they're still not on par with human performance, except in narrow cases. They're part of the solution, they're not the full solution. There's nothing wrong with people and Beazle's idea. I think they're absolutely right that that's part of how perceptual systems work, but there's a lot more to the brain than just the low-level perceptual systems that work in that fashion. So they're not wrong, but they're not sufficient either, I think, for artificial intelligence or for neuroscience. One way I like to think about it as a cognitive scientist is there are a lot of different things that go into thought and cognition. So you have common sense and planning, analogy, language, reasoning. You can sort of look at the chapters in the intro psych textbook to get one cut on this. Basically, what we have understood in neuroscience mostly, and in AI, is how to do some piece of perception. The rest of that pie chart, we really haven't addressed yet. So let me have an interlude, and then I'll go back to one of those claims at the beginning I think it is true. So the interlude is that my biggest fear about AI is not Skynet. So if you read about AI in the news these days, you see Elon Musk saying we are summoning the demon, and Stephen Hawking saying, it's going to be the end of humanity, or whatever his quote was. Maybe, but certainly not anytime soon. I think we should take those concerns seriously, but when we look at the level of AI that we've got, I think the real problem is we don't have very good AI, and a lot of things we could be doing, like figuring out how the brain works if we actually had good AI for solving cancer. So my biggest fear about AI is actually getting stuck. So in the field of AI, we talk about local minima. So the idea is that what you're trying to do is reduce error in some system. And the common technique is you do something called gradient descent. So it's like you're climbing a mountain, you take small steps, and you're climbing down the mountain, let's say. You want to get to the bottom of the mountain, that would be least error. And you take small steps, you keep going down, and you hope that that will get you to the bottom, but maybe it will just get you stuck in the valley, right? So that's what a problem with local minima is, which everybody in machine learning is, I think, acutely aware of. I think that we're facing a serious problem of reaching that as a field, as a whole, in artificial intelligence. So you can think of the field as a whole as doing this thing called gradient descent through the space of possible models for things like perception. And we're getting very impressive performance now in object recognition, where 20 years ago was basically an unsolved problem. It looked like we weren't going to solve it anytime soon. And the same is true for speech recognition. Each year, for the last few years, we've made tremendous progress. But that doesn't mean, maybe on language translation, but that doesn't mean that on the whole, for AI as a whole, that we're actually getting to where we want to be. So natural language understanding, being able to have open-ended conversational interfaces, to use a phrase I had before, being able to understand a talk like this, even if you've never studied this before, I don't think we've made any real progress. I think we are very much getting in one of these local minima. The fundamental risk is that we could spend a lot of time on AI, maybe using the wrong techniques, and get stuck and hit a wall. So we make progress and progress and progress, but maybe we eventually get stuck because we're on the wrong path. So in some domains, that doesn't really matter. So what is the #1 commercial application of AI? Anybody know? Advertising. Most AI work is on advertising. And look, if all of that stuff doesn't work quite as well as is theoretically possible, who cares? If I have a recommendation engine, I recommend to you 5 songs, and you like 4 of them, I could have done better. It's okay, you like 4 of the songs, the 5th one I'll call it a surprise, and we'll call it a day, everybody's happy, right? Not the case if I build a pedestrian detector that works 99% of the time, right? Also not the case if I build a home robot that lifts grandpa into the bed 99 times out of 100 and drops it 100, right? Then I have a domestic robot company that is going to go out of business because of litigation very quickly. Okay, so the last claim, and the one that I do actually think is true, is that brains are amazing and that reverse engineering them could be incredibly helpful for AI. But I would reverse engineer them at the design level, at the cognitive science level, trying to figure out the psychology of what they do. Maybe not, at least at this point, at the neuroscience level. In the limit, I would do it in neuroscience, but for now, I would do it with psychology. So here is one of my favorite human beings in the whole world. This is Alexander. He's 4.5 now. He was 2.5 when the story takes place. He's my son, in case you couldn't figure that out from the context. So I got a text message one day while I'm off giving a talk, and she said, so I asked my son, which of your animal friends will come to school today? And here my 2.5-year-old son says Big Bunny, and then he gave a justification for his answer. He said bear and platypus are eating. So he didn't do this as multiple choice of filling in the blanks. He did this as an explain your answer, right? Bear and platypus are eating. So then my wife goes into his room and she sees that bear and platypus are in fact sitting on a chair, and he has constructed a diorama. He did the whole thing by himself, which my wife was enthusiastic about. So why do I care? Well, one thing is it shows that he understands complex syntax. If anybody's taken linguistics, this is called a WH question. There's a transformation involved if you believe classical Chomskyan theory, which maybe you don't, but that's okay. So which of your animal friends will come today? It's complex syntax. It's logical reasoning. So he's reasoning that if bear and platypus are eating, they're too busy to come to school. Must be Big Bunny instead. He gives a novel answer depending on recent updates in the state of the world. I don't have for you today one of my favorite slides, which is a picture of Barack Obama. And it says, last year Barack Obama says that he was 54 years old. This year he says he's 55 years old. Which is it, Barack Obama? Now, you can only get that joke if you're human. The few in the back who didn't laugh might be androids. So if you didn't laugh, it's because you don't understand that time advances, people get older, and so forth. If you are like a search engine, you probably don't get that. If you're a search engine, you like total up, you have more hits for 54 versus 55. Well, that's the problem of not doing novel updates based on recent changes in the status of the world. But my 2.5-year-old, who's now 4.5, was not subject to these kind of errors. Pretty cool, eh? He was also able to use what linguists would call pragmatics. Okay, but that was, then, and in spirit of equal opportunity, oh, and by the way, he did this all without what people in AI would call supervised training with labeled examples. So he had 2 years of basically passive linguistic exposure and figured all of this stuff out. This is his sister Chloe. She's now 3, and I'm going to give a couple examples from her. One is from about 2 months ago. There was this armoire, and she made a piece of art, and she handed it to me. And I said, let's put your artwork in Mama's armoire. And Chloe says, that way Mama doesn't see it, but when she opens it, she can see it. Well, why do I care about this? Well, this shows that she was able to infer the intent behind Papa, that's me's proposed plan. She was able to articulate the reasoning behind my intent. We have a huge problem in deep learning of systems not being able to articulate what they do. She was able, without doing all kinds of like cognitive psychology experiments on me, or maybe she'd done them beforehand in any case, to figure out what it is that I was doing and why I was doing it. And she was able to understand a potential future that she had never directly observed. Right? The AI systems are completely dependent on responding to things basically that they have directly observed. Okay, in fairness, I asked Siri the same question. So my anecdotal data would be slightly less anecdotal. And I said to Siri, what happens when you put your artwork in, or put artwork in an armoire? And what did Siri do? Siri punted, as Siri has to do for anything that's not in that template. So what Siri did is it sent it off to Bing. And here's what, so it says, okay, I found this on the web, but what happens when you put artwork in an art model? And Bing, in all its wisdom, gave me an answer about what happens if you break an artwork, which had nothing to do with what I was doing. So I would say my daughter was way ahead of the combined forces of Apple and Microsoft on this one. All right, so this one's from this morning. I was not present, but I did take this picture in Stanley Park David Land Park a couple weeks ago of my daughter in a swing. So my wife was pushing my daughter this morning in a swing, and my wife, who's a developmental linguist, thought I would enjoy the sentence and passed it along, and probably realized I would put it into a talk, because that's what I do. That's how I roll. So the sentence was, Papa usually gives me one last push. Well, what was my daughter doing with that utterance? Well, from a psychological perspective, she was trying to induce my wife to apply a physical force to the swing. She wanted one last push. And she thought that she could persuade my wife to do it by comparison to what I did, thinking there's some kind of competition between parents or I don't know what. So that was pretty sophisticated, what psychologists call theory of mind, representing the beliefs and desires of other people. From a syntactic perspective, linguists would actually argue about the syntactic tree that I drew here, but it gives you at least a little bit of the flavor of what's going on. So you have something embedded in something else. There's two quantifiers in there. Linguists go nuts trying to figure out what quantifiers do. Usually it's a really complicated word because it doesn't have well-defined criteria. Like every has very well-defined criteria, but usually is a little bit shifty. One is a quantifier, and having two of these, all linguists in the room would know, is a complicated thing. So she was able to do all of this. The intuitive psychology, intuitive physics, there's a rich semantics there, complicated syntax. All of this reminded me of my mentor's first book. You probably know some of the books from my mentor, Steven Pinker. He's probably the second best-selling Canadian author after Margaret Atwood. Should know his books if he doesn't, like The Language Instinct is my favorite. And Bill Gates just said his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, was the best book he had read in the last decade or whatever. His first book, and least well-known probably, was called Language Learnability and Language Development. I read it when I was his graduate student. And I want to tell you something about what it said. It said that children are innately endowed with the basic semantics, which is to say notions of objects and events, things like that, and basic links between those semantic categories and syntactic categories, from which they bootstrap the rest of their understanding of language. And he also argued if you don't have some innate support, something built in to the mind, he didn't use the word screwed. You'll notice at the bottom it says fiercely reasoned, gently written. But screwed would probably be the right word. If you don't have some innate structure, you're never going to be able to learn the system. And he made specific claims about what that structure would be. I would argue, adding to that, that the fundamental lack of progress in natural language understanding, that flat line or nearly flat line from Eliza to Siri, is because people aren't doing the things that Pinker said kids have in their AI systems. They're having systems nowadays like character sequential learning. Deep learning people in the crowd will know what that is, which basically tries to get away without any innate structure at all. It doesn't really work that well. I wrote a book about innateness and biology in 2004 called The Birth of the Mind. Noam Chomsky liked it, not too many other people did, but you can go read it. You probably get it cheap on Amazon. They even have copies anymore. The argument there of that book was that it is actually plausible that the genetic structure might build a kind of rough draft of the brain. It would pre-wire the brain, not hardwire it so that it could never change, which would be crazy, but pre-wire it such that it could then be rewired. But nobody ever believes me when I talk about the human mind. They never want to think that there's any innate structure in the human mind. They're okay with it in some other circumstance, or maybe they'll believe that temperament can be innate, but they'll draw the line there. So I have stopped trying to make that argument. And instead, I present to you the baby ibex. You don't really need to have this. Baby ibex, you will see, is scrambling down the mountain, right? The baby ibex cannot do the deep learning thing of having 100,000 labeled examples. This step works, this one kills you. This step works, this one kills you. This is not an option for the baby ibex. The only thing that is an option for the baby ibex is evolution. Natural selection can play that game, right? So there can be a population of baby ibises that survive and those that don't. The ones that survive are the ones that come closer to having the right kinds of innate structure. Iterate, repeat over 1 billion years of animal evolution, and you wind up with a creature that can escape a predator by climbing down the mountain with maybe a month's experience. I forget exactly how old the baby ibex is. If that's not an argument to make you believe that biology can build innateness, I I don't know what will, but again, in the spirit of fairness, I will show you the comparable fruit of the AI. DARPA competition, millions of dollars in prize money. People had to rehearse all the events in advance. They knew what they were going to be, but they couldn't factor in things like minor wind currents, and that's what happened. All right, so to conclude, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. AI can't do anything yet that a person can do in a second. We're actually a really long way from that. You can read stuff in the newspaper all the day, every day of the week that sounds different. It's just not true. The brain probably hosts many different kinds of computations, not just one. In an argument that I didn't fully develop today, I've suggested the brain might be like a kind of circuit called an FPGA, which allows you to have many different kinds of computations coexisting. We're really not to the point where we can simulate a brain. We can collect a lot of data out of it, but we don't know where to begin in those simulations. We don't know what the lowest level primitives are, how they interconnect and do other things. This leads me to think, hey, maybe if we wanted to understand the brain, what we actually need is better AI to analyze all that data. But we're not there yet on that AI. Maybe what we need to do is to first construct a better generation of tools that can actually do scientific reasoning the way that children can do. I have my kids, I don't have a picture of this, but today at the Science Museum here in Vancouver, and they were watching this thing where you could press a plunger and about 5 feet away, water would spurt out. They thought this was the coolest thing in the world, partly because it was fun getting wet, but partly because it was like a new causal principle here. Kids are sponges for learning causal principles. We need AI that can do something like the same. So understanding how human children learn about the world might be a good approach to building the next generation AI tools that we need in order to get to a deeper understanding of neuroscience. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take your questions. I'll get you to read if you want more about neuroscience, by the way, with Christoph Koch from Brain Institute and the stars of our show. Thank you very much. Okay, so questions. I know I talk fast and
Yeah.
So what is this intrinsic structure? What does it look like and where is it?
Okay, what is the intrinsic structure and what does it look like? So the intrinsic structure that I'm talking about comes from developmental neuroscience, and it's the early organization of things like the cortex. I mean, I'm a little bit cortex chauvinist, I guess, and mostly interested in that part of the brain, but one can reach similar conclusions in other parts of the brain. But my reading of the developmental neuroscience literature is that roughly half the genome is involved in setting up a basic plan for what cortical areas are there going to be, how they're going to be interconnected. And it does this at multiple levels. So for example, we have topographic maps. I think someone in one of the talks is going to give an update on what we know about topographic maps in the retina. So those I always think of as like the ribbon cables we used to run between our computers and our printers. There's sets of parallel wires that allow a certain kind of structure to be preserved. So there's a whole bunch of developmental neuroscience mechanisms that, for example, make sure that we have lots of sets of parallel wires that allow us to build abstract hierarchical representations. Then there's lots of wiring that allows us, I think, or would appear to allow us to have connections between some areas and not others, or particular populations of cells over here and not over there. Make these things target that set of cells, but not this other set of cells. And so what it ends up looking like to me is something like this thing I was just mentioning a moment ago, which is an FPGA. It's a kind of integrated circuit for doing computation where instead of having a central processor that loads in a program, you do things in parallel across a broad section of things in a way that can be reconfigured, but that has a lot of intrinsic structure to it in the first place that is coming from these developmental processes, a lot of which consists of things like make cells die under a certain circumstance, or make them look for a particular target of chemicals. This is really exactly what that book, The Birth of the Mind, is about. The book is 13 years old, but the general principles that it described appear to still be correct. There's not enough epigenetics in that book. That's something we know about more, much more than we did in 2004. But I think the larger picture of what I portrayed there is right, that the brain is filled, or biology is filled with mechanisms for building kind of rough drafts of structure. It's not actually a blueprint. It's more like a self-assembling kind of system. But the biology has given us these rich tools. Nobody doubts this for a second, by the way, when it comes to the heart or the lungs. Nobody says, look at all the intricate structure of the lungs and how you have this cool radiation structure that looks like the cul-de-sacs in Columbia, Maryland. They say, oh, of course, and then, I mean, they never say, look at all this, oh, it must be learned, right? They never say, the respiratory system must have learned how to work. I mean, yeah, you can make it a little better, you can push your VO2 max by exercising. But the basic structure of that system comes from biology. Nobody would doubt that for a second. Somehow, it gets to the mind, and we have this, like, dualism that's still lingering from religion from 2,500 years ago, and people's brains melt. But I think if you look at the biology, it's the same toolkit, actually. It's building the lungs and building the brain, but there's more intricate versions of it in building the brains. Again, some of the talks in this conference, we'll talk a little bit about where we are on understanding that right now. So long ago. Kevin.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk. I guess we spoke at the very beginning briefly. I'm an AI researcher here at UBC. And I guess just one main comment, I guess I wonder what you think about it. I think if you had presented this kind of argument at an AI conference, that you probably have, but the kind of AI conferences that I go to, I think very little of what you said would be sort of heterodox or surprising to an AI audience. And I think probably the thing that you would get the most pushback on is conflating deep learning with AI. Because really the AI community has a subfield for every piece of your pie chart that you said AI doesn't work on. And it's really because you treated deep learning as all of AI that seems to be a problem. And
I think it's a 3/4 fair criticism. So you're right, I made that conflation here in a popular audience, I certainly know better. At the same time, I think that the field is completely dominated right now by deep learning. I think that if you go to conferences that call themselves AI conferences now, most of the people are doing deep learning. I think if you look at the funding, it's mostly deep learning. I think if you look at the scale of things, and I'm going to drill down into this one in a second, 7,000 people went to NIPS last year or something like that. There'll be 14,000 next year. That really is growing exponentially. If you go to some symbolic AI conferences of the sort that you and I would appreciate more, they're going to be much sparser. They're going to be much more poorly attended. So I think that the weight of the field in the press and also in the field itself has really shifted, and I'm pushing back against that. You're right. There's a bunch of other work, many of which I would say falls under the umbrella of symbolic AI, that tries to parse out those sections. I completely agree with that. At the same time, I'm really worried about the health of the field because of that shift. So as an example, you and I will both know, but not everybody is a failure. One can argue about the reasons for it. By my count, and probably by yours, there was something there that needs to be solved still, right? Leonard was probably right that we need machines to do common sense reasoning. You can't just learn everything from pixels, which is essentially what deep learning is trying to do. So I was in a panel with Demis Hassabis, who runs DeepMind, and Christoph from Alan Green might have been there, and so forth. There was a lot of illustrious people on the panel, and I asked, I might be conflating the panel, the two are the same here, but maybe this was the one with Andrew Ng and Jan LeCun, doesn't matter. So I asked this audience, there were like 700 graduate students and postdocs. I said, raise your hands if you have heard of Psych. Not, mind you, raise your hand if you like Psych. I would have assumed that no one in the deep learning world likes Psych. They're trying to take a very different solution where you don't do this kind of hard hand coding knowledge. But raise your hand if you've heard of Psych. And I got like 20 hands. And to me, this is scandalous. So you're right, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I didn't talk about. And I'm very worried that the field is not even thinking about it. I'm trying to motivate people to think that there's something behind another door. I should have said a little bit more about that door. And as an aside, I'm starting a new company, and the premise of that company is we actually need to bring these traditions together. So, the spirit of the question, I totally agree with. Other questions? There's one in the back over there.
Hi, I am totally from a different field, so I'm a molecular biologist. I want to ask a very kind of silly questions. I'm thinking about what you think about it. We all know there is the monkey and the typing machine, right? So if you're giving the machine to the monkey and allows type thousands of millions of billions, potentially there's a time when they're going to type something right that potentially going to generate a really big let's say, journal or like discovery. However, I was just like, and that's including like thousands of trials. But I'm thinking like if there's a machine learning towards this that helps to like screen out like this kind of error like sentence, like things doesn't make sense, is something like potentially gonna comes up after like say how we're gonna making the machine to make a discovery by themselves. Is that like some possible directions we can go for?
I can give a few answers to that. The first is my father has a name for that theory, my father, which was even a blind pig finds a chestnut sometimes, right? So one can have mechanisms that aren't very clever that still stumble on things. It's funny that you should bring up the monkeys and the typewriters because usually when people continue that thought, they mention Shakespeare, right? So they say, you know, monkeys, typewriters eventually will lead to Shakespeare. So in deep learning, people are actually building systems that make Shakespeare. I call it Fakesphere. It's fake Shakespeare. And when they make Fakesphere, it looks a lot like Shakespeare. You read it word by word, and the diction is exactly like Shakespeare because they've drawn it from the statistics of Shakespeare's time. But at the more abstract level, it never gets there. So the story never makes any sense whatsoever. Shakespeare would never put out anything that was completely incoherent, right? I mean, he would have lost his reputation had he done that. He would have thrown it away and started over. So there are things that monkeys doing Shakespeare can do well now. They can capture the texture of a lot of things. This is why we see a lot of deep learning inspired art nowadays. They can capture the texture of images, do all kinds of cool stuff. But at the abstract level, they really don't have the fundamental wherewithal to represent the right things. And so the probabilities are very, very low of getting anything. They're never zero, right? But the learning algorithms in principle, and this is something I wrote about in a book called The Algebraic Mind, are in principle, in my view, not adequate to make the kind of generalizations that kids do. So it's very unlikely that the blind pig will find the right chestnut when it comes to automated scientific reasoning and so forth. Doing sort of surfacey things like getting the flavor of Shakespeare, not so much. Several questions. One over here. We'll start with.
One over here.
Or one over here. Okay.
Just a naive question. You said about AI and whether we need to learn about the brain to make a better AI.
Yeah.
Do we really need to learn from the brain?
Do we really need to learn for the brain?
I get just from an example. So human beings try to mimic birds to fly and never basically make fly. And they change the strategy and they basically become more successful.
Yeah, that's more. I have a whole set of slides about that I didn't bring today, but that's more complicated than you might think. So the Wright brothers were actually very directly influenced by studying birds like quite a bit, and had some adaptations to their wing that were modeled on birds we don't use in modern airplanes, but the Air Force or something like that is doing a lot of active research to see if that can be, if the actual dynamics of bird flight can be exploited to make airplanes that can change much more dynamically in the direction. So that story isn't over yet, but it may be that we actually learn a lot from birds in terms of the final version of flight. That's the first thing I would say. Second thing is, the reason to learn about the brain is in part because 1 in 5 human beings suffers from some kind of brain deficit at some point. If we understood how the brain worked, that would be great, independent of AI. In terms of, do we need to understand the brain to make better AI, I would say that we don't know for sure, but it's a good bet. There are a lot of things, as I was arguing today, that machines just can't do after 50 years of work that are routine for human children. And so there's reason to go look at the children. That doesn't mean that what we want to build are replicas of human children. Peter Norvig, director of research at Google, has a great line about that. It's like, why would I want to do that? I already have 3 machines that do that. They're my kids, and they're in college. But we're not trying to build replicas of humans. We're trying to figure out the principles by which humans do certain things that have eluded machines. We bring them together with other things that machines don't need to do anything like people. So if we want a machine to play chess, they can do brute force. It doesn't have to be anything like people. They want to do arithmetic. It doesn't have to be anything like people. But if they want to be flexible and learn a whole bunch of different things quickly, we have no idea how to get machines to do that, so maybe we should look at people. If we want to get them to understand natural language, we have no idea how to get machines to do that, but kids are really good at it, so maybe we should look at kids. Maybe the final answer will be different, but it's the best candidate source of evidence that I know. Over here.
Thank you so much for giving this talk. I just have 2 really quick questions. The first of which is, if there is like a lot of research that has gone into looking at underlying structures for the heart and the lungs, is the same level of research or imaging not available for the brain? And if it isn't at the level that can discover these structures in the brain, what specific method could we have to find out some sort of organizational effects for children, like say the one that you noticed in the book? And secondly, what do you think about Chomsky's universal language acquisition device? Is this talking about anyone else? Like,
Is this talk what?
available anywhere else? It's like, I have no friends who wanted to come with them.
I believe it's being recorded.
Oh, okay.
Tim will answer your third question about where they can find it. Maybe later. So the talk, I guess, will be available online later. I'll try to do these in reverse order, which means I'll probably forget. Language acquisition device, I was giving Pinker's version of Chomsky in a way there. I do think that we're born with some language acquisition device. That was the point, in a way, of my book, The Birth of the Mind, was to try to figure out how that works. So if you make a claim, as Chomsky does, and as I would, and as Pinker would, that there is something innate in the brain, that's really a claim about biology. And so it's not enough for a psychologist, which is what I used to be to some degree, to just say, blah, 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 I have this argument, therefore this thing is innate. Really, the psychologist owes at least a conversation with a biologist to figure out, well, if it's innate, how do we get there? What is the relation between the genes and those knowledge structures? And the force of my book, The Birth of the Mind, was to try to argue that that's plausible. I don't think Chomsky got the details right, and I'm not even sure it's about language. So it might be a universal learning device that, for example, divides the world into objects and events and things like that, has a common set of categories. So I don't think we can have a blank slate, but it doesn't have to be exactly what Chomsky thought it is. I would say there's a universal learning device that's different in people than birds, for example. Some of my published work is actually about birds and people. I think that it's a different set of mechanisms, that they're innately constrained, but they might not be exactly as Chomsky said. I knew I would lose some of the questions. The first question was? I'm really sorry about that, but in terms of investigating, let's say... tools, right. So I would say, first of all, the brain's a lot harder to understand than the heart. And that's because the critical elements of the brain are very small and computationally diverse. So if you look at the liver, there's only a small number of kinds of cells. And so that makes it easier to understand the liver. If you look at the brain, there are hundreds of thousands of kinds of cells and hundreds of thousands of kinds of proteins. And we need to understand how they all work together. Jim Watson, who's not the most loved person in the world these days, but who figured out how DNA works, had this great line after the human genome was allegedly sequenced in 2002 or so. It was the first draft of the human brain. There was a lot of publicity. The newspaper reporters had no idea what to write about it because, okay, now we have this long genome, but what do we say about it? And what they discovered was there were fewer genes than we thought. So there was a San Francisco Chronicle headline I used to show which said, humans survive on a quarter as many genes as once thought, or half as many genes as once thought. Turned out that Walter Gilbert made up a number for a textbook that everybody read. The number he made up was 100,000 genes. The back of the envelope calculation. It was actually really good. He made it 30 years ago before we had the right sequencing tools, and guessed there might be 100,000 genes. He was off by a factor of, turns out to be 4. So Jim Watson's line, well, okay, it's not as many as we thought, but imagine you have a play with 25,000 actors, and you have to keep track of all of their individual interrelationships. That's really, really hard, and that's what we need to do to figure out how the brain works and how to figure out how cancer works and so forth. The way biology works, and the reason we need AI so desperately to figure out these problems, is because you have so many of these interactions. It's far beyond what any individual human being can understand. You look at any piece of modern biology, but many pieces of modern biology, and you see these complex network diagrams, gene cascades, many genes interacting, protein cascades, many proteins interacting. Well, that's what the brain is like. And there are certain cascades that happen so often, like the Krebs cycle in every cell, that you can get enough data on it. But maybe there are lots of things that are important to the brain where we only have a few examples of it, and they're hard to find, and we haven't actually done anything yet. And we don't quite know what part of that cascade matters, it doesn't, and so that's why it's so hard. Next question.
So as a developmental psychologist, I quite like your attention on children's learning processes and cognitive capacities as a way to build better AI. I was wondering about your feelings towards another potential focus. You mentioned a couple times just the importance that these training data play in what the actual system can do. I wondered how you felt then about some of the more recent wide-scale studies of children's environments and the kinds of data they do receive from birth onward as a way that might also help our building of this AI system.
I'm lukewarm. The reason I'm lukewarm is because I think the whole paradigm of, well, I guess it's two reasons. I think that the whole paradigm of data-driven AI is just wrong. I mean, of course you need data, but the kind of big data-driven version, I think is the wrong way to think about AI. So yes, there are some problems you can solve that way. But humans can learn things with very small amounts of data. And they can learn it from very diverse kinds of data. So I mean, obviously we want to quantify this. I'm lukewarm, I'm not negative. Knowing more about what kids' environments are is good, but I would bear in mind that kids across a huge range of environments learn more or less the same thing. So they can learn languages in environments where kids correct their parents correct their kids. Rare, but it happens in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Kids can learn in environments where parents basically ignore the kids. They can learn in places where their feet are bound up for the first year of life, and places where they shake the kids up and down, which we would never do in Manhattan. So kids are incredibly robust across a range of environments. If we had a good handle on that, you think of it as a mathematical function, how do you go from this broad range of data to particular children that mostly wind up with the same cognitive capacities, the same motor capacities, the same linguistic capacities? That would be great. If you kind of said, how do you take the environment of an upper middle class white person in, I don't know, Palo Alto, California, and you look at that function to language acquisition, that would be a problem. So to the extent that people are looking for diversity, I know there's some work in that now, it's good, but I also think people are overemphasizing the environmental data in the first place. And then what we really want to understand is how can you work even from relatively impoverished data sets, like having spinal motor atrophy and being in a wheelchair, not even being able to move around and still having representation of the world. That's what I think is really interesting. Not that I would abandon the other data, but that's where I think the crux of the question is. It's like, with modest amounts of interaction with the world, in all kinds of different environments, kids learn amazing things.
Okay, I think we probably have time for just maybe one more question.
Maybe some food's getting cold.
I just wanted to touch back on something you said earlier on about the brain using more than one form of computation. And it seems like a lot of the work being done in AI and even in cognitive sciences like language acquisition and that kind of thing are focusing mostly on statistical learning and pretty much statistical learning. And I was wondering what other examples of computation that aren't, I guess, statistically inferential that you can describe.
So the first thing I'd say is statistics are here to stay, but there's lots of kinds of statistical computation. So the statistical computation that deep learning does is, how do I set 1 billion parameters using 1 trillion data points or something like that? That's one kind of statistical inference. You can do things that are much more symbolic, that have abstract knowledge and have probabilities attached to some of that abstract knowledge. Kevin is shaking his head, and I would be shaking my, you're nodding in approval, and I would nod in approval. I think that's closer to what we want to do for many parts of cognition, is we need much more abstract knowledge that you can reason about. You still want statistics, you still want uncertainty. You want to know how true is this particular thing, and not just ignore that. One of the problems with early AI is people didn't have the technical tools or hadn't thought about how to use the technical tools to incorporate that statistical uncertainty. It's not going away. I mean, statistics are part of what's going on, but what's really being left out from the mainstream, but as Kevin rightly said, not from all of AI, is things like symbolic abstract knowledge, knowledge engineering, knowledge representation. It's not part of the limelight right now. It's not the people that are getting paid $500,000 out of graduate school with a PhD, but being treated like rock stars. But that stuff is still important. I think it's fundamental if we're actually going to make advances. All right, I guess we've run out of time. Thank you very much.